Hello and welcome to Cage Fighting. It's your main man Andy Gillard here. Hope everyone's keeping well in the world right now.
Finally, Matt Guy has come back to Cage Fighting. Hello, everybody.
Oh, there's going to be more there. Hello, everyone.
Well, I think what Matt was doing was a very not so subtle nod towards today's subject, which is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I think before we talk about Dwayne the actor, we really need to talk about Dwayne the wrestler, really. He was literally born into the wrestling business. His grandfather was an honorary member of a wrestling dynasty. His father was the first ever African-American champion in the WWF. His grandmother was the first ever female wrestling promoter, who his own mother followed in her footsteps. So he was going to be nothing but a professional wrestler until he then wasn't. His career did start out going down a different path, though. He wanted to make it big in the NFL. Following a championship season at the collegiate level, he failed to attract a move to the NFL before ending up north of the border in the Canadian Football League, but he only lasted 2 months and then was cut. A few months later, he went to the WWF, and then within a few months of that, he was on the main roster, making his debut at Madison Square Garden. Like, it's been a hell of a ride, and I don't think anyone has had the story that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has had. Matt, I know you're as involved in the wrestling business as me. Stu, you're more of a filthy casual, as you've said previously. Do you have much knowledge of The Rock as was prior to his movie career?
Yeah, because it was still... The whole Attitude Era thing was still my kind of prime era, and I did kind of dip in and out afterwards. So I know exactly who he was, and I didn't really like him, to be honest. As in the wrestling world, he annoyed me in a kind of almost like a kind of John Joe Shelby kind of way. He was not that he's racist.
I don't think he's ever been compared to John Joe Shelby before.
But in that kind of thing, like, he's obviously got something, but you kind of love to hate him. Kind of vibe. John Joe Shelby is just the first person that came to my head, which is worrying at any time of day. But yeah, I never really liked him to start with at that time, and obviously when he came back as a kind of like a cartoon version of himself, then he was much more lovable. But yeah, I think he's one of them that can, even for people who don't care about wrestling, know who he is and know him as the wrestler, The Rock, don't they? So he's one of them.
Matt, how did you come across Dwayne? What was your first memory of seeing him as The Rock?
Well, I kind of got into the wrestling business when Sunday Night Heat had kind of Kurt Angle debut, that kind of period of time, and then so he was already part of the main event scene by this point. I guess from a timeline point of view, that was the end of the Attitude Era, going into like the SmackDown era, when he was on his way out, I guess, really after kind of SummerSlam with Brock and everything else. And but in terms of like visiting history, it's amazing how somebody that garnered Die Rocky Die chance has ended up being the biggest paid global superstar in film. You would never have guessed at that point in time that he would have been on the trajectory that he was, but all the signs were there, really. If you think about everything that he did in terms of being the media darling for WWE, he was the face, not that ran the place, but he was definitely the face on the front cover of magazines and billboards and everything else. We probably should have known well ahead of time that he was going to have the movie career that he did, but as I'm sure we'll discuss, it didn't quite start off as fantastically as history will probably tell us that it did, as there's been some stinkers in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. My history of The Rock, I watched wrestling back in the 80s, like the British wrestling scene. I used to watch it with my nan on her little black and white portable television. Big Daddy and William Regal, who is still around now. So I sort of dipped in and out of wrestling for quite some time. And then I remember at school, because I'd like hit puberty and stuff and had facial hair, I grew out my sideburns. I had long sideburns, and people kept like referring to The Rock, and like I have no idea what you were talking about. I wasn't watching the product at that time, so that was literally what was the only reason I started to watch it, is because I had these big dirty mutton chops that people were referring to. So that was why I started watching it, and I immediately loved The Rock. I've always liked the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, he was the corporate champ. He was the one who could just wield the microphone like nobody else in the business at that point. So he was immediately my favourite wrestler at that point. It was that, and ever since then, The Rock's always been my guy, I think. So that I just love him.
You know, when you do the little thumbnail for this episode, you know, you're going to have to include a picture of you with these sideburns now.
He's huge.
I don't think I've got any pictures of it, to be perfectly honest, from back then. And of course, because I could do the people's eyebrow as well, that was another reason that I think I felt this kinship towards him. So that was why. Any particular moments of his wrestling career that stick out to you, Matt? Any good, bad, in the ring, out the ring?
I think, you know, being a WWE fan and long-term storytelling hasn't always been its strongest point. I think the fact that they gave you the main event of the following year's WrestleMania, the day after the WrestleMania where Miz retained his title, the fact that you knew what the main event was going to be a year ahead of time was quite special. Wasn't a good main event at the end, but it was. The fact that we had a 364-day storytelling was good. I also enjoyed the stuff. To say I enjoyed the stuff he did with kind of Mick Foley and Rock and Sock. Rock and Sock was a really short period of time in terms of, you know, the whole, but it was really special. It was really like the This Is Your Life birthday segment was one of the highest, if the highest, individual segments of in Raw history. And he's just been a part of so many moments. But the clip I always go back to more than any other is the Rock concert in Sacramento.
Yeah.
It's just brilliant. It's just
exceptional, isn't it?
For everything that you love about being a chicken shit heel, that's exactly what he is as well. He just G's the crowd up and gets them going and makes it out like that he's there for them and stuff. But then he pulls out the line about the best thing about Sacramento is The Rock gets to leave Sacramento, and it's just brilliant. It's honestly excellent.
It is. I think around that time we had that bit of a mini feud with the Hurricane. And he put the Hurricane over, who, for those who don't know much about wrestling, the Hurricane was a bit of a nobody really at that point in his career. He was quite a small guy, probably like 180 pounds, soaking wet, like he had nothing to him. And The Rock was The Rock, like he was the biggest name in the business at that point. And he did his best to like try and help out those below him. And they had some wonderful back and forths between them. They were always really funny. They had such great chemistry together. It was fantastic. I think that's a real underrated era of The Rock is his feud with the Hurricane. Stu, what about yourself?
I mean, there's no point even trying to... I mean, I was thinking about this the other day, that I can barely remember the winners of FA Cup finals anymore. Things I actually properly do care about, let alone storylines and things like that. And a lot of them are now... It's not one of the things that... Is it actual memory, or is it just meme memory? That you see these things over and over again, like what the reaction where he just turns round, that one that you see all the time. Did I remember that staying up at 3 a.m, or is this because I've seen it so many times in the last 10 years? I don't know. But yeah, like I said, for me, it was a lot of the older stuff, not the young. More when he had lesser hair, conveniently enough.
That's fair. Would you want to see him have one more match, Stu? Because there is talk of a return at this year's, well, not this year's, next year's WrestleMania. Would you be interested in actually seeing 50-whatever-year-old Dwayne Johnson step back in the ring?
If Ric Flair is still around, then why not? I think the barrier for entry for these things now is so low that why not? We might as well.
The Ric Flair last match, which was a couple of months ago at this point, is one of the worst things I have seen in wrestling. It was It was like it was horrible to watch. I genuinely thought I was going to see a man die in the ring. It was terrible. Matt, how about yourself? Are you invested in another Rocky match or?
I'm invested, ironically enough, because it's everything else around it. The whole like Reigns title run and everything else. It makes sense being the whole head of the table thing, and Rock himself has come out the other day in an interview and said, "I am the head of the table." So it's all being geared up to that. But I hope, and we're getting into. Sorry for anybody that doesn't like wrestling here. I could talk about this all day. I'm hoping what happens is Rock wins the title. Sami Zayn wins some form of Money in the Bank type stip and beats The Rock because Roman screws Rock at the end. And that's how Sami ends up with the title. And he doesn't pin Roman. There's his story for the next few months because now Sami's the head of the table and blah, 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 blah.
Fair enough. I mean, I haven't followed the Federation stories or anything at all, so can't really speak to that. As a fan, I want to see him because he's one of my all-time favourites, but seeing how bad he was in those last couple of matches with John Cena, and he was blowing out of his arse within minutes because he's clearly a body guy and not a cardio guy, I worry that he would be able to actually carry a match, if I'm being perfectly honest. I think it would be... As a fan of professional wrestling, I don't want to see him. As a fan of sports entertainment, I would welcome the return of the character.
Yeah. I think he just has to roll out the hits at this point now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? A sharpshooter here, a spine buster there.
Yeah.
You know, or either that or you go a triple threat and let Roman and somebody else carry the load.
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense, doesn't it? Moving on anyway. So we've got a dozen questions to answer about The Rock on the big and small screen. Before we get there, though, Dwayne currently has 6 films on his IMDb profile which have yet to be released. Big Trouble in Little China is getting a remake. Doc Savage, which is something that he's been linked to for about 15 years at this point, but it has been announced now. It's not DC Comics, but DC Comics own the rights to whichever publisher put out Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze. I don't know a lot about the character to really talk about it. We've got a sequel to San Andreas 2, which, I like the first San Andreas, but I'm not sure I want a sequel. There's a film called The King, which I know nothing about, and another one called Red One. And of course, Black Adam, which is out, I believe, it's either next week or the week after. It's some point this month anyway. Anything there that tickles your fancy, Stu?
I mean, I'm guessing that The King's basically the life story of Sean Dyche at this point. I'm going to go and see Black Adam anyway. I mean, it's getting increasingly more difficult to avoid the trailers of this because it's everywhere. Literally every. I mean, it was even in the. It was even on Monday Night Football the other night. Now, why is this film being trailed here? You never get blockbusters in Monday Night Football ever. But yeah, I mean it's got to this point now that anything that he's in, you're going to probably 90% probability going to go and watch it anyway. But yeah, Black Adam's just because I know more about it because it's like you said, it's the next week or so. But yeah,
yeah.
The rest, I mean, San Andreas is on my list of things. So I don't know. That film is something else anyway. To say I'd be excited to see it would be a lie, but will I see it? Of course I will.
Yeah, I know what you mean. The King, though, I've just had a quick look. He's playing a character called King Kamehameha. He's playing a Hawaiian king who fulfills his lifelong prophecy of uniting the Hawaiian Islands. It's directed by Robert Zemeckis, which, seeing those two names on it, okay, that actually sounds decent. Matt, San Andreas 2, Black Adam, a remake of Big Trouble in Little China. Are these things that are on your radar?
I mean, China, I think, would be good, but it depends how... it needs to be that. It needs to tonally be similar to the first one. I don't know how that translates in 2024 or 5 or whenever that will come out, but I think why I'm linking this to Top Gun, I don't know. but it's like Big Trouble in Little China will have that much of a cult following by the people that love it.
Yeah.
That if it's too much of a deviation, because Maverick was a clone, an updated, sexy clone of Top Gun, and that's why it worked. Whereas I think they'd have to do the same again for it to have any hope. If they tried to like make it too tonally different from the original, I think it would be awful. But I'm looking forward to Black Adam. I don't know really anything about the Black Adam, and when I say I know nothing, the only thing I know is from the post credit in DC League of Super Pets. That's literally like as much as I know. So, and that was enough to say, yeah, I'll probably really enjoy this. So I'm looking forward to that, and I think I'm going to try by hook and by crook to figure out some way of getting a cinema pass back, so I can make that my first film back with a fresh cinema pass, as I've let it expire now.
That sounds good. So the first question of the dozen: what is the first film of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson that you saw? Stu.
Well, I look at it. I thought it was Scorpion King, and I've talked about the end of that film a lot over the last 2 years of doing this, and that's nothing to do with him, is it? But then I look at it. It said that he was in Mummy Returns, which I've got no memory of whatsoever. I mean, it obviously has the Scorpion King and the same character, but I don't remember him in it at all. I know it's been a long, long time since that film came out. But still, I don't remember it whatsoever.
See, I think you may have got them mixed up. So, Mummy Returns, which is also my answer, that is the one with the horrendous CG.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the Scorpion King, which was out a year or two later. There was none of that CG bollocks. That was the story of him as he was before he became a weird scorpion human hybrid CG mess. But yeah, that's the same one for me as well. That was his first film. His first film proper was The Mummy Returns. I was so excited going to the cinema, and I'm sure it was on my birthday as well. So it was like a birthday outing to go to the cinema to see The Mummy Returns. Matt, is it a clean sweep? Is it Mummy Returns for you as well?
Clean sweep across the board, baby. Yep, I remember it. And I remember being like, oh my God, who's this? What is the state of this? I mean, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like we were in virtual reality territory when that came out, or do you know what I mean? We were in 4K, but God, it was bad. Even for then, it was bad. And I think looking back now, I think we were a bit spoilt by the Mummy films. You know, they really are excellent and stand up now. At least the first couple do. I know, obviously, they went down a different route later on, and then Tom Cruise got involved in a sort of sequel reboot down the line. But the first couple of Mummy films were really good, I thought. They were just, they were harmless, slightly more sexy than Indiana Jones. Just a bit of fun, really. And obviously with a supernatural twist to it that you didn't get in, or you flirted with Indiana Jones.
Just in case, I don't know if you've got The Scorpion King on either of your lists. Have you seen any of the sequels to The Scorpion King? Because there's been 5 movies in total.
What? No, I haven't seen any of them, though.
I think that the most recent one, I believe, was out within the last couple of years as well. And there's been talk of a reboot of that. But I've never been able to sit through any of the sequels. I think, I don't know if it was John Cena or Batista is in one of them as well.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Stu, have you seen any of the sequels?
I don't even know there were any sequels to it. Well, that was bad enough. I don't know what. It's like RoboCop Prime Directives again, that is. Why would you make more than one?
Yeah, I think it is that level, to be perfectly honest. I think it is the absolute dregs. Because I believe they were all straight to DVD nonsense, so they got mostly ignored by people. It was only when looking through lists for this podcast that I noticed there was more than one Scorpion King. So what is the last film of theirs you saw? It doesn't have to be the last one released, just the last one that you saw. Matt?
So, like I mentioned earlier, DC League of Super Pets. Watched it a couple of weeks ago now. Just an excellent all-round, family film. Watched it on a kind of, I say, a lazy Saturday evening where just didn't fancy going out. Just wanted to watch a film, few snacks, chilled out, have a bit of a laugh with it. And it's, like I've mentioned a million times before on this podcast, the perfect animated kids film is the one that's filled with adult references that you can snigger along at and don't feel silly for watching it, and you could just enjoy it for that. And it was full of them. It was absolutely full of them. Little quips here and little obvious jokes there. And it was an excellent film, and he was brilliant in it also.
Yep, completely agree. I had a real good time watching that movie. Stu, what was yours?
I mean, that was mine as well. But, just for argument's sake, before that, it was Red Notice.
Of course, the one that we reviewed, yeah. I forgot about that.
The 80s film in 2022 in all its fun glory, which that's one of them. I mean, we talked about it at the time, David, that a lot of these Netflix films they are what they are, and then you watch them and then carry on. You don't think about it again. I mean, like the one that I watched with was it Gosling? The last one I watched on there.
Yes, the Grey Man.
Yeah, the Grey Man, which again I completely forgot the name of, even though I had a good time watching it.
Easily forgettable, I thought.
But Red Notice has stuck with me, and I can't wait for the sequel to that. I mean, or another 2 or 3, depending on where they go with it, because it's a film out of time. It's great.
I thought it was quite interesting that looking on his IMDb page, there isn't a Red Notice 2 on there. I assumed that they'd been signed up to do, at least 2, maybe even a trilogy of films, but there's no mention of another one. So I wonder what's going to happen there.
Well, Netflix announced it though, so.
Well, this is what I thought, but whether or not it's starring the trio again, I don't know. My last film, it was one I actually watched that I hadn't watched at the time. And I remember reading about it when it was released and thinking, this sounds really interesting and up my street. And it's a film called Southland Tales. It's actually the answer to another question that we've got coming up, so I'm not really going to talk about it at this point. But that's the last film I saw. It's from 2006, and I finished off watching it like about an hour before we recorded this. So what is the best film in which they've starred? It doesn't have to be that they're the best in it, but it's the best film in general, do you think, Stu?
I mean, this was easy, and I'd be amazed if it's not yours as well, and it's Moana. It's just great. Having young children as well, seeing that film quite a lot. And I've even got... it's over there. When I was sorting out through some of the old toy box, and I found certain characters, not Moana, she's gone. But he's there. And he's not being shut out. He's going to go there next to the PlayStation sign. Because, I mean, everything about that film, it's just pure fun. It looks amazing. Even in 4K, in HDR and all that kind of other gubbins, it generally makes it even better again.
Yeah.
Which is almost impossible, really. Which gives me tingles how good Avatar Where the Water's going to be. But yeah, I mean, it was easy. Moana, one of the best films ever made.
Yeah, I agree. It's my answer as well. It's probably my favourite Disney film, which it takes some doing because for so many years it was always The Little Mermaid. For me, it was always my favourite. But ironically, Moana has blown that out of the water. I think Moana is absolutely exceptional. And as you say, when you throw in the 4K restoration, or not even restoration, it's just the 4K-ness of it on Disney Plus. It is absolutely stunning. Like, there is no way an animation should look that realistic when you look at the way the water moves and everything. It is beautiful. One of my all-time favourite films. It's definitely my favourite Disney film. I think it's excellent. Absolutely fantastic. Matt, I'm guessing this isn't going to be a clean sweep on this one.
No, sadly not. Now, I preface this by saying I don't think it's the best of his films, but I think that in terms of what it did for him career-wise, puts it there. And I would say that it is Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. Now, I say that because obviously he was in the Fast Furious franchise, and they're bigger films probably than Jumanji. So in terms of being a stardom, it doesn't make it. Jumanji never made him any bigger, but I think it made him more accessibly mainstream, and it actually showed a bit more depth than just being a tough guy. Now, I know he did other films that we'll probably discuss where he wasn't a tough guy, but they weren't good films. These were closer to being like B-movie, cheap budget films that just have a famous wrestler in them. This was a family-friendly, big budget film in which he showed a bit more heart than being just a knucklehead. And it was the one that elevated him, I think, to then being the top grossing or top paid actor of all time at the moment that it is. I think Jumanji is the turning point for his career, and that's why it's probably the best movie of his career.
I think you make a really good point there, actually, because I think up until Jumanji, he had done a few other films that were like The Game Plan, which I believe is a Disney film. He had done those, so people outside of late teens and grown-ups knew who he was, but probably not to a great extent. And at this point, he was on a roll of doing your fasts, and he was also doing stuff like Rampage and Skyscraper, which he did. I know these were after, but these were films that in the UK at least were 15, 18 plus. But Jumanji is one where it was for the whole family, and he did show some acting chops in that. Yeah, he played what I believe people refer to them as himbos. He was a male bimbo. But that's sort of the point of the character, and it was so much funnier than it had any right to be. That film should have absolutely died on its arse, but it was brilliant.
Yeah,
both of them and the sequel.
Yeah, they managed to capture lightning in a bottle twice with that. Incredible. So, what is the worst film that they've starred in, Matt?
I mean, worse, it's probably fond in some people's hearts, but, well, not with me. So, The Tooth Fairy. Just, that's the other side of what I was saying only mere moments ago, in that this was a point in his career where it was, let's just get a famous face into a shit script. And for cheap pops and an easy film to make, and there's nothing to it. There's no substance. It's not even like big budget, and it's just a bad all round film. You can excuse bad action films because they're easier to laugh at, but when you're supposed to be laughing at something or like a child's film like The Tooth Fairy, and it's not funny and is still shit, it's harder to have a better time with it.
I'm saying nothing, Stu.
I haven't seen it. It never appealed to me whatsoever, this film. It was very much... It seemed like a kind of poor man's version of like Kindergarten Cop and Mr. Nanny and all that kind of bollocks. It was just nothing at all in there. So mine was, of the ones... I mean, there is a few on the list that I haven't seen, fair enough. But mine's Hercules. It's just shit. It's just... It kind of... You can see where it was made, and he kind of, he's fine for the role, whatever. But it just seemed like let's just grab the sword and sandals kind of phase while we can, and put any old shit out with the biggest star we can, literally biggest star at the time. And even things like Troy is better than Hercules, and that's going some. I don't think it's not a very good film.
Yeah,
I haven't seen it.
To be fair.
Troy's all right. I haven't seen Hercules for a while, but again, I've got no intention of seeing it for yet another significant amount of time, because it's just very meh, and that's even more annoying than being shit for me.
I've got that as an answer to one of the later questions, so I'll come back to that one. For me, the worst film is the one that I've already mentioned. It's the latest film of his that I saw, Southland Tales. It is the messiest piece of shit I have ever seen. It was borderline incoherent. He's fine in it, and it's 2006, so it's very early on in his acting career. And he plays someone who's supposed to have amnesia, and it's really stilted, really wooden, like not at all what you associate with Dwayne Johnson, especially because by 2006, he'd been the wrestler, The Rock, for 10 years at this point. He knows how to emote and do all of that. And somehow in Southland Tales, they just completely fucked it. It's 2.5 hours long. And he just jumps from place to place. It's got Justin Timberlake playing two versions of Justin Timberlake, and neither of them are particularly likable. It's just really, really fucking weird and terrible. And I think it made like $600,000. It was horrific, and like I honestly, I wouldn't recommend anyone to watch it. If you need to watch all of the Rock's films, I would still say skip that one. It absolutely stinks. The next question is, what is the most underrated film they've appeared in? Now, my answer is The Tooth Fairy. I think The Tooth Fairy is actually I think it's a really good film for The Rock, because he did get to show that other side of him at that point in his career. We'd had films like, we'd seen him obviously in The Mummy and Scorpion King. We'd had Walking Tall. He was doing these kind of films which were all a little bit B-movie classic, as you said before, Matt. They were all very much genre films, I think, where when we got to something like The Tooth Fairy, he showed that he was more than just this generic musclehead. He had a little bit more to him, that he did have this softer side. Now, I'm a sucker for anything with Stephen Merchant in as well, so pairing those two up together, I felt they worked really well. Their little, the camaraderie between the two characters was fantastic, where you had Dwayne, who was this sports star who was sort of failing, and you had Stephen Merchant, who was playing a fairy who couldn't get his wings. Like, it was nonsense, but it was fun nonsense. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a lot funnier than it gets credit for. I think it kind of gets ignored now because of who Dwayne has gone on to become. You don't really talk about those kind of movies. But I thought it was excellent. I thought it was a really good performance. I thought it was a really fun film for what it was. It wasn't high art. It was just fun. Stu, what's your most underrated Rocky film?
I mean, you've mentioned it as well earlier on, Skyscraper. I really like Skyscraper. It screams one of my films, though. It's everything. It's got all the ingredients there for one of my kind of things, and I just really like it. And I just think no one ever talks about it ever. And like you talk to people about films like Die Hard, which is what it is, and you say, "Oh, Skyscraper. Oh, who's that? Oh, he's got The Rock. He's got one leg." And you think, well, it just sounds ridiculous. And obviously, there's moments in there that are completely farcical. But it's just a really, really entertaining romp of what it is. It knows what it is, and it's so batshit insane at points that it works. And it could easily be a Hobbs and Shaw spin-off as well. The way that it's got that kind of vibe about it, I just really like it. And I remember watching it and thinking, when it finished, I think, why does no one talk about this film? It's great. Just if you like that kind of big, it's not even big budget. It's just silly action bollocks. Watch Skyscraper. You can't be disappointed.
I completely agree. I really enjoyed it, and it's got like that Dread and The Raid feel to it, where it's all just in one, and they do lean into it, and they really do go balls to the wall mad in parts, and it's really good fun. But as you say, no one seems to even know this film, let alone has seen it. So it's a good choice, that one, is Joe. Matt, what about yourself?
From my point of view, when I think of it as being underrated, I think of it mainly because it was a victim of what was going on at the time, and that would be Jungle Cruise. Now, I put Jungle Cruise because this was the beginning of what now Sam really got annoyed about with Hocus Pocus 2, in that this was just a Disney Pluser that was a non-event, really, that it just existed on Disney Plus, and it just stumbled across it because it's The Rock. Now, I know you think, well, that's probably why he's cast, because he's The Rock and he will attract eyes, but it's weird, because that shouldn't be why I'd want to watch this film. It's like, it should have enough because of its plot and everything else. Like, it should have felt like a bigger deal than it was, because actually it's a really good film. Visually, it's really good to look at. It's got like a big chunky heart to it that you don't expect from a film of this nature. And all round, it's just a really good romp, like really enjoyable. But I don't think if you did Family Fortunes now or Pointless, this would be like a 5 out of 100 answer that it even exists, because it's just wallowed away with the rest of the Disney Plus vault that will never get seen by anybody unless someone's stupid enough to do a podcast where they watch all the films of a particular actor. You know what I mean? Like, it will just get locked away in the vault, and it's a shame because it's a really good film.
Absolutely.
You know what? It's weird with that one because it was massive for about 3 weeks when it first dropped on Disney Plus, and everyone was talking about it. And it was that was that a lockdown film? I think it was, wasn't it?
I saw it at the cinema, but what they did was they released it on Disney Plus Premium for like 2 weeks, where you could pay 20 quid to watch it, and then they released it on Disney Plus Normal.
Yeah.
So I got to see it in the cinema, thankfully, and I'm glad I did, because it's very much a big screen experience. I think it benefits from that. But because it was there, it had such a short life and then was dumped straight onto Disney Plus because we need hashtag content. It did get done dirty a little bit, I think.
Yeah, it didn't have a shelf life, and that probably explains why. That it was huge. I mean, it was on buses and all sorts of things. It was plastered everywhere for a very short space of time, and then just vanished.
It was, yeah. So, as an actor, what is it you like about him? What is it that he brings to the table that you appreciate, Matt?
I think it's the subtle nods that, and it's the same things I like, ironically, about John Cena. Really, it's the subtle nods that everybody knows that he is. That, you know, the women want to be with him and the men want to be him, and all that. His charisma that transcends from the wrestling side of things as well, but it's those sideward looks sometimes, like even at the camera or breaking the fourth wall, and it's those little nods that you know that he knows he's the Rock and not Dwayne Johnson. Sometimes, do you know what I mean? He could, like, some performances you just know he's playing the Rock, and some you know he's playing Dwayne Johnson or the character he's supposed to be. And I think that's what I like about him. Like, he can almost be two different actors playing whichever roles he wants to be, and that's what I quite like about it. He's just, it's not, he is acting, of course he's acting, but he's just naturally very charismatic, like John Hamm in Closer London. But he's just he makes it look very effortless. Does he do the most challenging roles? No. You know, will he ever win an Oscar? Probably not. But we've got enough Anthony Hopkins in the world. I'm not sure we need every single actor to be an Anthony Hopkins. You know what I mean? So he's okay doing what he's doing for the time being.
Yeah, I completely get that, totally. And it is that charisma that he brings to every single role that he does that is one of the things that I love about him, because he manages to elevate the script and the film. So like Skyscraper that Stu mentioned before, that's a film that 99% of the time I probably wouldn't be that bothered about, but Dwayne manages to elevate what's there because he's so likable and you always root for him. You always want him to do well. Even when he's playing someone who's a bit of a shit, you still like him because of who you know he is. Sometimes maybe that's to the detriment of the film, I don't know, but I find that it's just infinitely more watchable when he's in it than when he's not in a film, personally. Like, I mean, I've said it before about there's some actors who, if you give a film a star rating, it's always going to have at least 3 stars because the actor's in it.
Mm-hmm.
And if Dwayne Johnson's in it, the worst film with a Dwayne Johnson in is still a 3-star film because he's in it. And I think that's what he brings for me, is it's just that infinite likability about the guy. Stu?
Yeah, completely agree. A bit mixture of both. The fact that he seems a thoroughly nice bloke. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I know we said a lot about artist versus art, and you have permanent wankers like Christian Bale who have to be really, really good at their job and give amazing performances for you to like them and to believe them and to accept them in a film because of who they are away like behind the camera. Whereas people like him, people like Cena seems like it as well.
Mm-hmm.
he seems like one of them. Well, we know, but from looking at all the stuff from Peacemaker and the behind the scenes things, how he seems to go out of his way. And where you watching Welcome to Wrexham, and you see them two seeming like really good, genuine blokes, and you think, well, good, fair play to you, good on you. That you don't, with all this money, you don't have to act. You could act like complete arseholes and still be as successful as you are. But that likability factor does go a long way, and like you said, it kind of excuses sometimes performances that they're not the best. And I think the fact that he doesn't seem to take himself very seriously as well is always a factor.
Yeah,
because as people know, I'm not a very serious person myself, so I'm going to relate from that point of view that. Yeah, he's having fun with what he's doing. He seems to know his limitations, and he just stays in his lane and just enjoys himself, and that comes across in every time you see him on screen.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, like obviously you and I, we've like dived into the depths of the wrestling world, the murky side of things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anyone I've ever heard say a bad word about Dwayne Johnson.
No, I mean, you don't get the... Was this Randy Orton or was this John Cena shitting in someone's...
That was Randy Orton. Yeah.
You've heard about Cena using his pulling power to like stop a push a la Hogan back in the day, and you've heard some of the things, he's very much in Vince's ear and would be able to direct him which way he wanted, like some kind of ventriloquist dummy. But you don't hear that very often about The Rock. I think the way that Mick Foley talks about him on his podcast is very much one that he's very easy to get on with and very willing to learn. And I think let's not forget he's like a third generation superstar, if you will. So he's going to know the etiquette and how to succeed in the wrestling business anyway. So, but outside of that, he just seems like an all round. I mean, you've seen that video like that's been going around where someone passes him their baby. Christ, that's just
insane, isn't it?
That's the kind of it's like that kissing babies and hugging fat chicks line that Batista used. That's the kind of thing that like The Rock's about now. And I mean, God, it's only a matter of time before young Rock becomes reality, isn't it? In the presidency, just a matter of time.
Well, you'd think so. He had said this week that the presidency's on hold. I think he wants to spend a bit more time being a dad because obviously he's got 2 young daughters, I believe. So, yeah, I think his career is probably going to end up in politics at some point. So we're going to end up with another. He won't be a governator, but I'm not quite sure what the joking nickname will be for him. But yeah, I can see him going that way. So, what is the best performance that he's given? Might not be the best all-round film, but it's the best performance that he has given. Stu?
Hobbs and Shaw. The reflex reaction there to just giggle, but if you think of how good he is in that film, all the like we just said about all the likability factor and not taking himself seriously and embracing completely who he is, and in this kind of setting, he ticks every single box in that film of rockness, Dwayne Johnson rockness, and it's got no right being as good as it is anyway. Been a spin-off of a stupid franchise in the first place. But I thought, well, both of them in that film are great, but I thought he's really, really good. And even my mom, who doesn't really like anything like this anyway, even she enjoyed that film. And that's always kind of a test of these things. He's a really good actor. He is. Well, yeah, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But yeah, I just really enjoyed that performance in Hobbs and Shaw. And Ethan was talking about it the other day that he wants to watch the Fast and Furious films now. I mean, he's 11 years old. And amazingly, I looked at it and the first ones are 15. How?
Okay.
Other than DVD theft, which is obviously way worse than mass murder in the later ones. But watching one of them a week again, I can't wait to get to Hobbs and Shaw.
Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Matt, yours isn't going to be a Fast and Furious, I'm guessing.
No, it is not. Now this is one of those maximizing your minutes performances because he's barely in this, but when he is in it, he's just sensational. And that is the grossly underrated The Other Guys. When he plays, when he's dancing in The Other Guys along Samuel L. Jackson, he's in it for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes at an absolute max. But he plays the arrogant super cop that everybody loves, and he's It's when I say he's playing the Rock, he's playing the Rock on steroids as a police officer, and out of like. Without those characters being massive wankers, you don't get Will Ferrell's character being as pathetic as he is, and he's the absolute antidote for them. It's a shame that they were only used as that plot device, because when they jump off that building and you think, oh, like they're going to be not the villains of the film, but they're going to be at least the antagonists. And then when they get fucking splattered on the floor, you're like, what? They don't do this to the Rock.
Yeah.
But for that like 10 minutes he's in it, he's just brilliant. Like the line delivery, the arrogance, but the suaveness of it was really fun to see him in that.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. For me, my favourite performance, which the one I think he gives the best actual performance, I'm actually going onto the small screen, and it's Ballers.
Oh,
I think he's absolutely phenomenal in that TV series. Like John David Washington and Rob Corddry, who also star in that with him, they're two very, very good, very big actors. Like, they give performances that generally steal the show whenever they're on. And Dwayne Johnson manages to go toe-to-toe with these guys, and at no point does he like pull focus from what's happening. The show lives and dies on how Dwayne Johnson really holds it all together. And the fact that it ran for, like, was it 4 or 5 seasons, leans very much into his history with being a collegiate footballer and what have you. And it's such a good performance where you go through the highs and lows. You go through him being happy when his career's taking off as an agent, but then also through the lows when he starts to have troubles with pain med and stuff like that. It's something I don't think we've really experienced a lot for Dwayne on the big screen. I think a lot of his performances generally are, I don't want to say one note because that's really harsh, but there isn't a lot of variation in what he does. He tends to have a character that goes on an upward trajectory throughout most of the film. Whereas with Ballers, you had the troughs and the peaks with him, and he handled it perfectly without ever really looking out of his depth with some proper actors in there. He did a tremendous job. So yeah, Ballers. And it's another one, I don't think enough people have seen it. It's such a good show.
Yeah, I'll redact mine, and I'm going to completely agree with you. Ballers never crossed my mind for that reason, because it's a TV show.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, we were talking about watching, because I mentioned this the other night about something new to watch now. House the Dragon and Rings of Power finishing. And she tapped out at episode 4 of Dharma for how dreadfully awful it is. Subject-wise, the actual series is really good. That's for another time. But I mentioned Ballers because it was on the list on the old IPTV thing. And she was like, "What, really?" And I went, "Yeah, really? We haven't seen it. When did was it 6 years ago, something like that?"
It was 2015 to 2019.
Yeah, a bit further, 7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, completely agree with that.
Have you watched Young Rock yet?
No.
Matt, have you watched Young Rock?
No, I haven't. I want to be fair, because like I've seen the clips where he meets a young Paul Levesque and Mick Foley and that, and it looks great. I'm finally getting round to watching some TV. Like I've nearly finished Ted Lasso, and I just want to get the few things I'm watching out the way, and then earmark a few other episodes of things to watch. And Young Rock will be starting. There's also Tales from the Territories I want to watch as well, which is kind of a Dark Side of the Ring side hustle where they're talking about like the old days of like maybe Jim Crockett and stuff like that.
Yeah, which is also in conjunction with Dwayne Johnson's 7 books production, isn't it? Which I didn't realise till the other day. That should be really interesting. But like I we've spoke about it on here, but the Dark Side of the Ring series is excellent. So I've got quite high hopes for that series as well.
Have you seen any of that, Stu?
No.
I honestly think you should watch it because
I've got them downloaded on my tablet. I was going to watch it on the way back from Chelsea last week, but it was so bad that everyone was just in a rage. Because after we mentioned it ages ago, I thought, well, I'll just get them. And I know I'm not going to sit at home and watch him, but watching that documentaries on the road is kind of seems more where it belongs, really. But yeah, they are primed. There will be next. Because is it made by the same people who do the 30 under 30s? I know that's
no. It's a Vice production, but it's nothing to do because 30 by 30 is HBO, isn't it?
ESPN.
ESPN. No, it's not. It's not. But it's well worth a watch, and there's enough cameos in there from enough wrestlers that you'll have heard of, and there's some stories that you'll never heard anything about, but are really interesting, like what happened to Bruiser Brody and stuff like that is well worth a watch.
The Bruiser Brody one's brilliant.
It does look really well made.
No, it is. Yeah, it is. They're just like very digestible chunk shows, and yeah, there's some which are really horrific content wise, but some that are more tongue in cheek. Dark Side of the Ring, like the North Korea one, Andy, when they go to WCW, go to North Korea and stuff like that, or when Ric Flair gets his dick out on the plane ride from hell, that kind of stuff.
But then, like on the flip side of the coin, as you say, you've got Bruiser Brody who was murdered and the other person didn't get done for it, and you've got the
Chris Benoit and
the murder fly Jimmy Snooker nonsense as well. Like there's some real like depths of despair stories as well as much lighter, much sillier stuff. So it's a wonderful series. So I'd recommend it to anyone, even if you don't like wrestling. I think it's a really interesting world to look at from the outside. Moving on. So that's the good. My question now then, in retrospect, what role should they have passed on? Either the role wasn't befitting of Dwayne Johnson or they just weren't very good in it. My answer, it's one that you mentioned, Stu. It's Hercules. Whilst he looks perfect for the role because of his size and the grandeur of seeing him on screen wearing the Nemean lion as his cape, it was a Brett Ratner film and it felt very Brett Ratner. The script was very weak, and I believe it's based on a comic book, which makes it even worse that they've got an original source material and they just completely shut the bed with it. I felt it was really poorly edited as well. There's bits in it where they just have no continuity between scenes. It was terrible. There was no chance for him to really stretch his legs and show that charisma. He was just this grumpy old bastard. Which, I mean, fine, there is an interesting story to tell of Hercules at that point of his life. But Hercules, the film, was not it. They really shut the bed in that movie. I think a better writer and a better director might have got something else out of it. But Brett Ratner is one of the absolute dirt worst. And it turns out he's a bit of a cunt as well. So he's like doubly white. That film needs to fuck off. I think Dwayne Johnson really made a mistake playing that role. It just didn't suit him in the slightest. Matt, what have you thinking?
So I've gone with 2004's Walking Tall. Now I've gone with this not because it's an awful film. It's not awful. It just exists in the annals of time. But it was early enough in his film career that if it really shit the bed, it could have been a death nail because it had all the hallmarks that it should have been shit. And I mean that because Johnny Knoxville's in it. Really like Johnny Knoxville, not an actor though. And he was very much at that point in Jackass fame. Jackass wasn't like the nostalgic thing it is now, where we like love it. Then it was still very much disliked by a lot of people, older people at the time. And I think it was a risk, And then you look at the cast after that; nobody's in it. Yeah, people are in it, but no, it's not like he's straddled by Hollywood greats in it. Also, and then it's not really a film where he's going to stretch his acting chops either. And I just think, like at that point in time, he was lucky to have got away with Walking Tall you know, if it was any worse than it probably was, that could have been we're not really going to take a risk on Dwayne because, you know, from a budget of like 40 mil, it made 50 mil. It's not like it doesn't even show that he was a box office draw either.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, that could have been a bad film for him to have made, and he got away with one.
Yeah, if I remember rightly, it's a WWE Studios film, isn't it?
Okay.
And like I think if I can just quickly find the filmography, it doesn't give me the number. There's probably about 80 odd of these WWE studio films. Depressingly, I've seen them all. And only 5 of them are sort of okay. So the fact that this is one of the sort of okay films tells you the level at which they're pitching it. It's not, like you say, it's not a bad film, but it just sort of exists. It's not great.
The irony is the decent WWE Studios films are all from the 2000s. There's not a single decent one after that. So you've got See No Evil, the Kane one. That was okay. The Marine is what it is. The Condemned, which was the weird kind of not like a reality TV show one, wasn't it? With Stone
it was
Cold.
The Running Man, but with Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vinnie Jones.
Yeah. Then you had 12 Rounds, the Cena one, which was a film.
I quite liked 12 Rounds 3 with John Moxley. I really enjoyed that one, to be fair. But they all do stink a little bit. I mean, some of the later ones, like Fighting With My Family, which might be on someone's list, I don't know, which that was obviously pushed by The Rock. Fighting With My Family is a good movie. And one for you, Matt, The Crow is going to be a WWE Studios film. Yeah, it's got TBA for the release date, so I dread to think. But yeah, that's going to be a movie that's going to get made. Jeez. Yeah, absolutely horrendous. Did you know that they are remaking Walking Tall as a TV series?
I did not.
Starring Charlotte Flair.
What?
Yeah, it's been shopped to, I don't think it's NBC, to USA Network have picked it up apparently. David Icke, not that one, is the showrunner on it, and it will be starring Charlotte Flair. Yeah, that'll be something shit probably, but yeah.
she doesn't have the crossover appeal though at the moment, does she really? I wouldn't have thought.
She does not, and she's also really stilted whenever I've heard her on the microphone. Like she's not a natural talker, so I do wonder how she's going to cross over into that world. Who knows? Maybe in 20 years' time we'll be doing a podcast on our favourite Charlotte Flair films, but
maybe. I
would be stunned if that's the case. Stu, what should Dwayne have passed on?
San Andreas. I just I don't see what he does, what the point of him in that film is. It could have been any. I know we could say this for a lot of things, but in that one specifically, it could have been anyone. It could have been Michael Chiklis. It could have just, you know what I mean? It just seemed, it seemed like a film out of time. It seemed like about 10, 15 years later than it should have been now, when the whole Roland Emmerich kind of end of the world, end of catastrophe films, taking away Moonfall from last year, which, whatever that is. We can't spoil Moonfall. It's fun, but San Andreas. It just seems. That's why I can't believe there's a second one. I can't believe it in my bones that it's happening, because it just seems so dated and awful, and he didn't seem to be like he wanted to be there. And I know he was kind of like stressed or whatever, but nah, it just it wasn't for me, and that's for a film like that to not kind of hit with me. It kind of says everything about it, and no one really looked arsed, and that kind of came across. I mean, it's probably got about a 5 or something like that. I wouldn't be surprised if it's got anything less than that either, but it's nah. It
has got a 6.1 on IMDb. So yeah, very, very MOR, I believe, is the term for it. I don't like end of the world films. Like we've mentioned it on here before, The Day After Tomorrow and that kind of thing isn't my jam. But as I said before, it's got The Rock in, so it's 5 stars for me. So you can replace any actor throughout all of time with The Rock. Who would you replace with Dwayne? So what film and what actor or character in that film would you replace with Dwayne Johnson? Stu?
Now, this is going to be bending the rules a little bit. And if we take that film and reboot it, let's just put him, since Skyscraper is Die Hard, just put him in Die Hard.
He would work as a John McClane type, wouldn't he?
Yeah. And it'd be even more ridiculous than it was anyway. And knowing what kind of a bloke that Bruce Willis turned into eventually, before his illness, we're not doing that. He does seem the most agreeable of people. But when you've got someone, if you replaced Bruce Willis with The Rock in Die Hard, you could make a lot more Die Hard films, which would be a very good thing. So for that reason alone, Die Hard.
I'd be all for that, to be fair. Matt, where would you go?
Now, I'm saying this not because I think that the actor he'd be replacing deserves it, because as you will know, Andy, I'm a huge fan of his work, but because the film is an underrated gem but needed more eyes on it. And The Rock would be replacing Hank Azaria in Run, Fat Boy, Run.
Brilliant.
Because that film needed bigger stars than Simon Pegg and Hank Azaria to give it the oomph that it needed to be a bit more of a success. And I think he plays, there's the scene when Simon Pegg's character is at the gym with him and he's stood up and he's got his legs of the talc and everything. Wouldn't that be so much more intimidating if you've got fucking Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's pavement scraper in front of you? Do you know what I mean? And I think that whole him coming over and being the alpha male would work really well, and he can still be a bell end and then get his comeuppance at the end and everything else. I think he would have worked, and it would work, and it would have made that film a bit more of a box office draw. And unfortunately, I think it's just lost to the sands of time in Simon Pegg's filmography, because it was kind of came before Mission Impossible and everything else, but after Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, and it's kind of it's a good film that just I don't think gets the eyes it deserves.
It's his tentative first steps away from Edgar Wright and into more Hollywood stuff, isn't it? That's David Schwimmer, is it? Directed it, I believe. Yeah. It's fine. I quite enjoyed it, and it definitely deserved a bit more than what it got, I think. It's a great choice, though, that is. My answer, this is going to be Rock in maybe 30 years' time. So this is going to be a mid-70s to mid-80s, somewhere in that range. And
Marlon Brando in The Godfather.
No.
Okay, sorry.
Not quite that. I want to see him replace Sean Connery in The Rock.
Oh, wow.
Just because I want The Rock in The Rock, and I think he'd be really good as this surly old bastard who escaped a maximum security prison, and he's having to help this cocky young prick scientist in Nick Cage help him through this labyrinthine to try and stop the bad guys. I think The Rock would be really good. I think I can see this in his future when he turns that corner and he becomes a bit of a grizzled old vet at it. He's still a little bit fresh-faced for someone who's in his 50s at this point, and I feel like we've got a future of him where he can be a bit surly and a bit grumpy. And I think he'd be perfect for that role. We've seen glimpses of it here and there, but we've never had a full sort of swing of the bat with him. And I'd quite like to see The Rock in The Rock. I think that'd be the one for me. So that's something I would like to see in his future, is this surly, grumpy bastard of him, someone who has been through the mill a little bit, because I feel like Dwayne is leaning into the Reynolds quandary at the moment, in that he's an actor who is loved for doing a very specific thing at the moment. It's getting to the point where he could possibly lose some of what people love about him. I think he might want to change it up now. So the next question is, what would you like to see Dwayne do in the future? Stu?
It's when we talked about Tom Cruise and how he was very much doing the same kind of, not obviously in a physical kind of size way, but he does the action films. He's the AAA list megastar. And then you got A Few Good Men, which is a completely different thing. And he puts a really excellent performance in it. So something like that, like a courtroom drama, nothing to do with any action whatsoever, just a proper acting chops performance. Could he do it? We don't really know, because he's never done it before. So, just out of curiosity, I'd just like to see it, just to see if it works. I mean, his sheer size is obviously going to be a problem anyway. But and it's how do you get around that without doing a little bit of a joke? Yeah, I could have done something else, but I chose the law or whatever. But not just a courtroom drama, just something that doesn't involve explosions or anything like that. Just straight up drama, just to see. I think it'd be interesting, if anything else.
That's a good call, to be fair. Matt, do you think that The Rock's size is a drawback in some respects? Could you buy him as a substitute teacher in a film because of the way he looks, or does he have to be the leading?
It's tough that, because if all I think of is Kindergarten Cop. So I don't see him as in Good Will Hunting, or like, do you know what I mean? I don't see him in like like something serious. But is that because of his size? I don't know. Like, but you take the risk, you get it wrong, it really would hamper your career. Not that he needs money or anything, but you know what I mean? Like, when you're on a roll, why would you stop? If it's not broke, don't fix it, kind of thing. I don't know. Is the answer. I mean, do I think he could put in like a tearjerker performance in the film? Yes. But do I think he's got the capability of making like a modern classic? Would you put him in Inception? Do you know what I mean? I'm not sure you would. So it's a tough one, really. I mean, my pick for this answer is, it sounds silly now I'm saying it, but I want him in a big budget version of Starship Troopers.
Excellent.
Like, as the grizzled vet though, as the ones that are getting the recruits through basic training, and then ends up drafted in as well. Do you know that kind of role where he gets to like swear profusely and he's an absolute bellend to like the troops? But because Starship Troopers, another one where it's like it should be really shit, but it's really not. Like, it's excellent, and I think it'd have enough of a cult following that people would, and then put The Rock in it and make it like big budget, people would flock to it in their droves.
I think there's been something of a renaissance of Starship Troopers over the last few years. People have reevaluated it, and I think when it was first out, it was seen as a schlocky B-movie nonsense, but now it's more of a sort of depiction and a deconstruction of America's love of military. Like, it's not the film I think a lot of people thought it was back in, I want to say 97, but it might be later. I can't. Yeah. That's a good call. I'm going back in time a little bit further, and I want to see him do like a Kings of Comedy type role. I mean, I suppose the modern day version would probably be something like Joker. I think we could see something of The Rock, because we've seen interviews of him talking about his battles with mental health. And I'd quite like to see him try and take that onto the big screen. Give him a character who's a little bit damaged, someone who's like out of their depth and struggling to keep their head above water. So the character in King of Comedy taking someone hostage at one point, kidnapping them and kind of losing his marbles with it all. And I'd really like to see him try something that just to stretch himself, but not so much that he would be completely out of his depth, because we've seen him do the comedic side of things, that he could be that character on stage, but then at the same time he could be the character off stage when he can lean into his experiences with his battles with mental health. And as an advocate for mental health, I think it would be a really powerful thing to see the biggest, toughest dude in the world, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, actually battling the demons within. And I feel like he could do something quite profound with that. I'd really like to see that in his future. So the next question, I want to know, how did Dwayne Johnson make it to the very top of the field? Like, wrestling, even at its height during the Attitude Era, it wasn't really respected, was it? Let's be honest. It's almost always been a punchline form of entertainment, especially within like proper sport world. It's wrestling is something, as a fan, I've always felt I've had to defend. Like, you know, it's fake, don't you? Like, no, mate, of course. You know, you can never quite get to grips with it. So how did a former fake fighter go from being the biggest in the sports entertainment world to being the biggest in just the entertainment world? What was it that Hulk Hogan failed at when, like, through the 80s and 90s, Hulk Hogan was that day's version of The Rock, but he never made that jump. How did Dwayne Johnson do it? What do you think, Matt?
I think attaching themselves to really good projects helped, like Fast and Furious, to get him in the public eye. I think was a really good call. Then attaching himself to the Disney world, then, because you're getting yourself in these camps of, okay, your testosterone, adrenaline junkie, Fast and Furious fans in one corner, your Moana corner in the other, so Disney, parents, everything like that. Comedies that link the two, like Jumanji and things like that. Then he's with Kevin Hart and he's doing those kind of comedies. He's been very good at picking the roles that get him in the public eye in all of these different areas and constantly producing good content. And he's a draw in all of these areas as well. So that's how you become the biggest, because you're loved in all of these genres, really. You're like, yeah, he's put some stinkers out there, and that's who hasn't. Even Nicolas Cage has put some stinkers out there, by Christ. But he's just, either his publishing team or whether Brian Gewirtz has been actually with him his whole career and guided him along the way in what roles he should be taking or what have you. But he's always just been in the public eye, but never stuck around one genre so long that he becomes stale in it. And like you said about Ryan Reynolds, he needs to now mix it up and do something else to keep himself on top.
Stu, what do you think?
All of the above and masses of charisma. Because you have got to think as well, which as we haven't mentioned, he's not a white man. And so to do what he's done with his Samoan heritage as well is pretty fucking impressive, to be honest. And no, like you said, it didn't work for Hulk Hogan, the most American man in the world, where at that time in the 80s, it really should have done, and it didn't. And why? Maybe because he's a bit of a bellend, because people could see through it. Maybe that's why. But you look at other things, like you said, like the Marine films, which I love the Marine films. They are stupid, but they're fun. But the Miz has never crossed over. Why? When you look at him, you think, oh, he's exactly what you want to cast someone as. Didn't work for him. I think it does have, like you said, why do you like him? I think that has a lot to do with this as well. Just because he just seems like a thoroughly nice bloke. On top of everything else, that he does pick his projects properly. He can laugh at himself. And he doesn't seem to have that kind of thing where he's above anyone. And maybe that's why, because he had these knockbacks from college football that didn't work for him. He had to try a different way. Maybe that's why, because he had to go down the route of his family, and however it worked, his character and the way he holds himself just endears him to people. And I think generally, if you're a nice person, you're going to go somewhere. You'd like to think that you're going to get rewards for being like that. And I think that's really what has done it for him, his charisma and him being who he is.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, like you touched on the fact that he had to take a different route to how he got here than what he planned. And the one thing that, like, the young Rock, I mean, I know obviously it's very much from his point of view, so he's the hero of the story, but he does seem to have this absolute drive that I've never seen anyone else in the world seem to have to succeed. The fact that Seven Bucks Production is the fact he turned up and that's all he had in his bank account. He had $7, and he somehow managed to make that into being the biggest paid actor in the world now. The man's drive to succeed, his will to win is incredible. And I think that goes a long way. And as you said as well, he's likable. People want you to succeed if you're a nice person. And it's nice to see someone who isn't a grade A cunt like Hulk Hogan is. It's nice to see them succeed, whereas Cunt Hogan was, some of the worst out there, and like he has now become pretty much a punchline of a person. So it's nice to see the flip side of the coin, that it isn't just a wrestling thing, that it's more than that. So the final question, in another attempt to reboot the Universal Monsters universe, Dwayne Johnson gets cast to play Dracula. You get to choose who plays his sidekick Renfield and his nemesis Van Helsing. Who are you picking? Stu, go first.
I've taken this a certain way, and since every time they try and reboot this world, it constantly fails. The best Dracula film in the last 40 years was Dead and Loving It. So, with that in mind, I'm going with Bob Mortimer as Renfield and Russell Brand as Van Helsing. Just for the sheer lunacy of it all, and just lean into that. Make it as stupid as possible. If you're having The Rock as Dracula anyway, that this whole thing just turns into a complete farce. So why not do it like that? I mean, Bob Mortimer has done acting in the past.
Mm-hmm.
He's not the best at it, but who really cares at this point? And the same with Russell Brand, regardless of his views on other things, he is funny. So, and the Centrinians films, well, the first one, not too bad.
I quite like the first one, but I do have a thing for Gemma Arterton, to be fair, so that might be why.
I didn't realise that she's on free radio now,
Is she? I might have to tune in.
4 o'clock. That was a revelation. But yeah, there you go. Bob Mortimer and Russell Brand.
Wowzers.
Matt, who would you cast?
So I would have Mick Foley as his sidekick, as more of like a Baldrick Blackadder character.
Yeah,
as I think that would work quite well. But then bringing it back to slightly more serious, but also then a nod to the Black Adam DC world of it, and have Henry Cavill as Van Helsing.
Oh, nice.
To then have that nod to it, and then those sideward looks that I mentioned before, and the history that they will soon have in that world will bring that charisma that ties that film together. So I think Mick Foley would be really good as this ratty, sidekicky character that he could have as Dracula's like sidekick, but then the Cavill stuff would bring it back to Hollywood mainstreamy side of things as well.
I think I've gone for a bit of a mix of both of your answers. So I agree. I think you need to have a bit of a comedic element to it. Like, vampire nonsense is inherently comedy to me. Like, it's not scary, really. They're a bit shit, vampires. So I think you have to lean into the comedy of it. I think that's the only way forward. So for me, for Renfield, I would have Andy Samberg. I think he would be the perfect foil as a bit of a bumbling idiot. That brings that Jake Peralta to it from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, his character there. I think he'd be great because he can bring heart and he can also bring laughs. I think they'd make a great double team together. For Van Helsing, I think as well you need to bring someone who's got acting chops and who has got like establishment in Hollywood. And I was going to go for a villain from one of the Fast and Furious films. And I don't know why, but Charlize Theron was like the first name that immediately sprang to mind. I quite like the idea of seeing Theron up against Dwayne Johnson and not in that way. I think that they would clash quite well together. So that's the pairing that I would go for. She just seems to be the most opposite, but someone who's still got presence on screen. So that's why I'd go for Charlize Theron.
Very good.
Right, so that is this week's podcast done and dusted. Please let us know what you think of any of our choices, or, you know, who would you cast in a Dracula remake starring Dwayne Johnson? You can get us on Twitter at CageFightingPod and all of the others, TikTok and Instagram. It's all the same. Next week's film is going to be a movie called Red Rock West. It is starring Nicolas Cage, this one. It's a weird little film that I'd never heard of before, but watched it this week. It's quite enjoyable. It was on Netflix a couple of weeks ago. I think it's been taken off, but check out justwatch.com to see if it's streaming anywhere near you. Please make sure you subscribed, and if you could leave us a review, we will love you forever. So for this week, Matt, would you like to say goodbye?
Take it easy, everybody. Look after yourselves. Check in on your pals. Have a good week.
Stu, would you like to say goodbye?
No, I just wondered what would happen then if you hadn't realised what you'd done. If the whole universe would have collapsed in on itself. Yeah. Have fun, guys. Goodbye, everyone.
It's goodbye from me, and remember, be excellent to each other.
The Rock feels so good, he's so happy. Why? Because The Rock is right here in Sacramento. I tell you what, the absolute best part about being here in Sacramento is in about an hour and a half, The Rock is gonna leave Sacramento.